The mud-splattered stage rolled into Tascosa, Texas, on a sweltering June afternoon in 1878, carrying nothing but dust, disappointed dreams, and one woman the world had decided wasn't worth a second glance. Josephine Harper pressed her face against the grimy window, studying the raw frontier town spread before her like a hand of cards dealt by fate. Single-story buildings lined the rutted main street, their weathered boards bleached gray by the relentless sun. Men in dusty boots and worn hats moved between the saloons and trading posts, their eyes hard and their manners harder. This wasn't Denver, where she'd grown up in modest respectability. This wasn't even close to civilization, but it was all she had left. The stage lurched to a stop outside the depot, and Josephine gathered her few possessions with trembling hands. Her carpetbag held everything she owned now: 2 plain dresses, her mother's Bible, and the tattered letter from her aunt that had brought her to this God-forsaken corner of the Texas Panhandle. That aunt, it turned out, had passed 3 weeks before Josephine arrived. The funeral was already over. The house already sold. The welcome already withdrawn. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his tone dismissive. He'd barely spoken to her the entire journey, and when he had, his words carried the same contempt she'd grown accustomed to hearing. Josephine climbed down without assistance, her worn boots sinking into the Texas dust. The afternoon heat hit her like a physical force, and she adjusted her bonnet against the brutal sun. Around her, other passengers were greeted by friends and family, swept up in embraces and laughter. She stood alone, clutching her carpetbag, trying to decide which building might offer her some temporary refuge. "Well, look what the stage brought in," a woman's voice drawled from the boardwalk. Josephine turned to see 3 ladies in expensive dresses, their parasols protecting their delicate complexions from the sun. The speaker was a blonde woman with calculating eyes and a cruel twist to her painted lips. Another mail-order bride who got stood up, I'd wager. "I'm not," Josephine started, but the woman talked over her. "Let me guess, honey. Someone promised you marriage, a home, respectability out here in the territories." The woman's companions tittered. "And now you're here with nothing and nobody wants you." The words cut deep because they weren't far from the truth. Josephine had come west because her aunt's letter promised family, a fresh start away from the scandal that had followed her in Denver. Her fiancé had broken their engagement publicly, declaring her unfit to be a proper wife, spreading rumors about her character that weren't true but stuck nonetheless. Her father, a merchant who'd fallen on hard times, couldn't defend her reputation and hadn't tried very hard. Her mother was dead 5 years. There was nothing left for her back east except whispers and pointed fingers. "I'm looking for work," Josephine said quietly, lifting her chin despite the heat burning her cheeks. "If you'll excuse me." "Work?" the blonde woman laughed. "Doing what exactly?" "The only work for a woman alone in Tascosa is at the saloon, and you don't look the type." Her eyes raked over Josephine's plain dress and modest appearance with open disdain. "No, you look like the type who thinks she's too good for honest work, but isn't good enough for a decent man." Josephine's throat tightened, but she refused to cry in front of these women. She'd heard worse in Denver, endured worse. She turned away and started walking down the street, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step. Behind her, the women's laughter followed like a swarm of wasps. The general store seemed like the most logical place to start. Josephine pushed through the door, grateful for the slightly cooler air inside. The proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, looked up from his ledger. "Help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather not. "I'm looking for work," Josephine said. "I can keep books, I can read and write well, and I'm good with figures. I worked in my father's store back in Denver. The man's expression didn't soften. Denver, huh? What brings you all the way out here? Family circumstances, Josephine replied carefully. You got references. Someone in town who can vouch for your character. I just arrived today. My aunt was Martha Cunningham, but Martha passed, I know. The man set down his pencil and crossed his arms. Look, miss, I don't know you and I don't know anything about your character. I've got a business to run here and I can't have just anyone handling my accounts. Besides, I don't need help, I see. Josephine swallowed her disappointment. Thank you for your time. She tried the boarding house next, but the proprietress took one look at her and shook her head. I run a respectable establishment here. I don't take in single women without references or a clear means of support. Too many questions, you understand. The hotel was no better. The restaurant wasn't hiring. The dress shop owner practically shooed her out the door. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Josephine had been turned away from every establishment in Tascosa. The message was clear: she was an outsider, a woman alone, and therefore unworthy of trust or respect. She found herself sitting on a bench outside the closed land office, her carpetbag at her feet, trying to formulate some kind of plan. She had $3 to her name and nowhere to sleep tonight. The stage back to Denver wouldn't leave for 4 days, and she couldn't afford the fare anyway. The situation felt impossible. You lost, madam. The voice was deep, rough around the edges, but not unkind. Josephine looked up and found herself staring at a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the setting sun. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, framing a face weathered by wind and sun. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up shirt sleeves, were thick with muscle earned through hard labor, not leisure. His hands were large and calloused. Everything about him spoke of strength, of a man who could survive anything the wilderness threw at him. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue, startling against his tanned skin, and filled with something she hadn't seen directed at her in months: genuine concern. I'm not lost, Josephine said, straightening her spine. Just resting. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. That carpetbag says otherwise. You came in on the stage this afternoon. Are you the sheriff? Josephine asked, a touch of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Am I not allowed to sit here? No sheriff in Tascosa right now, and you can sit wherever you please. He hooked his thumbs in his belt, making no move to leave. Name's Harrison Dalton. I live up in the breaks about 10 miles north of here. Came into town for supplies. Josephine hesitated, then decided there was no point in being rude to the one person who'd spoken civilly to her all day. Josephine Harper. Miss Harper. He nodded respectfully. You meeting someone here in Tascosa? I was supposed to, she admitted. My aunt, but she passed before I arrived. Something shifted in Harrison's expression, understanding, perhaps, or sympathy. Martha Cunningham was your aunt. You knew her, some. She was a good woman. I'm sorry for your loss. He paused, glancing down the street toward the setting sun. You got a place to stay tonight. Josephine's silence was answer enough. Harrison's jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in those blue eyes, anger but not directed at her. The boarding house turned you away. Everyone has, Josephine said quietly. I don't have references, you see, and I'm a woman traveling alone. That makes me either desperate or disreputable in the eyes of respectable society. That's horseshit, Harrison said bluntly, then immediately looked apologetic. Pardon my language, Miss Harper, but it is. You're a woman who needs help, and this town ought to be ashamed of itself. The fierce protectiveness in his voice startled her. This stranger, this mountain man who looked like he could break most men in half, was defending her honor when no one else would. "It's kind of you to say so, Mr. Dalton, but Harrison," he interrupted. "And it's not kind, it's true." He stood silent for a moment, clearly thinking. Then he seemed to come to a decision. "Miss Harper, I've got a proposition for you, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Josephine's guard went up immediately. She'd heard propositions before, from men who saw a woman alone as an opportunity. Harrison must have seen the change in her expression because he quickly raised his hands. "Nothing improper, I swear on my mother's grave. Here's the situation. I've got a cabin up in the canyon breaks. Good solid structure with 2 rooms. Been living alone there for 3 years, running cattle and trapping. It's isolated but safe. I'm heading back there tonight because I don't like staying in town. You need a place to stay, and I've got room. I'll give you the bedroom, I'll sleep in the main room. No expectations, no obligations. Just a safe place to rest until you figure out your next move." Josephine stared at him, searching for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. All she found was honest concern and a straightforward offer. "You're asking me to go into the wilderness with a complete stranger." "I know how it sounds," Harrison acknowledged. "But think about your options, Miss Harper. You can spend the night on this bench and hope nobody bothers you, which isn't likely given some of the men who frequent the saloons here. You can keep begging at doors that aren't going to open. Or you can trust that I'm offering help with no strings attached and take me up on it." "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" Harrison's expression softened. "My mother was a woman alone once, when my father died and left her with 3 boys to raise in the mountains of Colorado. People helped her when they didn't have to. She taught us that when you see someone in need, you help them if you can. It's that simple." There was truth in his words, in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders. Josephine had spent enough time around dishonest men to recognize honesty when she saw it. And despite every warning voice in her head telling her this was madness, she found herself trusting this stranger. "One night," she said carefully, "until I can figure something else out. 1 night, 1 week, 1 month, whatever you need." Harrison picked up her carpet bag before she could protest. "I've got a wagon loaded with supplies around the corner. We should head out soon if we want to reach the cabin before full dark." Josephine stood, brushing dust from her skirt, and followed this mountain man who'd appeared like something out of a frontier legend. As they walked toward his wagon, she noticed the stares from townspeople, heard the whispers starting. Let them talk. They'd already decided she was unworthy of their respect. At least Harrison Dalton was treating her with basic human decency. The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, loaded with flour, coffee, beans, and other supplies. Harrison helped her up onto the bench seat with a gentle hand under her elbow, the kind of courteous gesture she'd once taken for granted, but now felt like a treasure. He swung up beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked to the 2 horses. As they rolled out of Tascosa, heading north toward the canyon breaks, Josephine allowed herself to breathe properly for the first time all day. The evening air was still warm but less oppressive than the afternoon heat. The landscape opened up around them in shades of gold and amber, the endless Texas sky turning pink and orange as the sun descended. "It's beautiful," Josephine said softly. "It is," Harrison agreed. "Harsh sometimes, unforgiving, but beautiful. I've lived in these breaks for 3 years now, and I never get tired of watching the sunset." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking steadily along the rutted trail. Josephine studied Harrison from the corner of her eye. His hands on the reins were confident and sure. His posture was relaxed but alert, constantly scanning the landscape around them. This was a man comfortable in his environment, at home in the wilderness. You said you run cattle, Josephine asked. Some. Got a small herd, maybe 60 head. I also trap beaver and fox when the season's right, sell the pelts. Do some hunting, supply meat to a couple of the restaurants in town. It's a living, not a fortune, but it suits me. You live out here completely alone, mostly. Got neighbors about 15 miles east, a ranching family named the Millers. Good people. Otherwise, it's just me and the land. He glanced at her. Gets quiet sometimes, but I prefer it to town. Why? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. I was in the war, he said finally. Fought for the Union, saw things no man should see. After it ended, I tried living in Denver for a while, working in a lumber mill. But cities felt too crowded, too loud. Out here, I've got space to breathe, space to be myself without anyone watching or judging. Josephine understood that feeling more than he knew. I grew up in Denver, she offered. Left because staying became impossible. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, Harrison said gently. But somehow, Josephine found she wanted to tell him. Maybe it was the vast openness of the landscape around them, or the kindness in his eyes, or simply the relief of having someone actually listen. I was engaged to be married. Thomas Whitfield, son of a banker. Everyone thought it was a perfect match. Then Thomas decided I wasn't suitable after all said. I was too independent, too opinionated, that I'd never be the proper submissive wife he needed. He broke the engagement publicly and spread rumors that I'd behaved inappropriately, that my character was questionable. Harrison's hands tightened on the reins. What a coward! The simple, fierce declaration made Josephine's throat tight. The rumors spread. People believed him because he was respectable and I was just the daughter of a struggling merchant. My father couldn't defend me, didn't want to anger the Whitfield family. So I became the woman who wasn't good enough, who wasn't worthy of respect. When my aunt's letter came, offering me a new start, I jumped at it. And found out she'd passed, Harrison finished. That's rough, Miss Harper. You've had a hell of a time. Please call me Josephine, he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Josephine, pretty name. The wagon rolled on, climbing into terrain that grew increasingly rugged. The land here was broken by deep canyons and weathered rock formations, painted in layers of red and gold. Juniper and mesquite dotted the landscape, and Josephine spotted a hawk circling overhead in the fading light. We're almost there, Harrison said as they rounded a bend in the trail. The cabin sat nestled against the canyon wall, positioned to catch the morning sun while being sheltered from the worst of the wind. It was larger than Josephine had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. A small corral held several horses, and a creek wound passed about 30 yards from the front door. Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then came around to help Josephine descend. His hands at her waist were gentle but firm, and she was acutely aware of his strength as he lifted her down as though she weighed nothing. "Let me show you around," he said, grabbing her carpetbag and leading her toward the cabin. Inside, the space was clean and surprisingly well organized. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books, and a comfortable-looking armchair near the hearth. A bearskin rug covered part of the wooden floor. Harrison led her to a door on the side wall and opened it to reveal a smaller room with a bed, a washstand, and a trunk. "This was going to be for when my brothers visit, but they haven't made it out here yet," Harrison explained. "Bedding's clean, I keep everything ready just in case. You'll have privacy, and there's a bolt on the inside of the door." The fact that he mentioned the bolt, acknowledging her need for security without making her ask for it, told Josephine everything she needed to know about his character. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you, Harrison, truly." "You're welcome." He set her carpet bag down on the trunk. "I need to unload the wagon and tend to the horses. You get settled. There's water in the pitcher there for washing up. When I come back in, I'll fix us some supper." After he left, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed and let the tension drain from her shoulders. The mattress was comfortable, stuffed with straw and corn husks. The room smelled faintly of cedar and fresh air. Through the small window, she could see the last rays of sunlight painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and purple. She was in the middle of nowhere with a man she'd met hours ago, and somehow she felt safer than she had in months. Josephine washed her face and hands, changed into her other dress, and emerged from the bedroom to find Harrison stoking the fire in the hearth. He'd brought in supplies from the wagon and was setting out bacon, beans, and cornbread fixings. "Can I help?" Josephine asked. Harrison looked surprised. "You don't have to. You're a guest." "A guest who doesn't want to be useless. I'm a decent cook and I'd like to help." He gestured to the ingredients. "Then I won't say no. Truth is, I'm better at catching food than cooking it." They worked together in easy companionship, Josephine mixing cornbread while Harrison fried bacon and set beans to warm. The domestic simplicity of it felt oddly comforting. As they cooked, Harrison asked about Denver, and Josephine found herself telling stories about growing up in the growing city, about her mother who'd loved books and music, about working in her father's store and learning to keep accounts. "You're educated," Harrison observed, clearly impressed. "My mother insisted on it. She wanted me to be able to think for myself, to be independent." Josephine smiled sadly. "Turns out that's not what most men want in a wife." "Most men are fools then," Harrison said firmly. "A woman who can think and reason and hold a conversation is worth 10 who just smile and stay quiet." They sat down to eat at the table, and Josephine realized she was genuinely hungry for the first time in days. The food was simple but good, and the company was better. Harrison ate with the steady appetite of a man who worked hard physically, but his manners were surprisingly refined. "You said you have 2 brothers?" Josephine asked. "Had," Harrison corrected quietly. "Henry died in the war, same battle where I got this." He touched his left shoulder, where Josephine now noticed he moved with slight stiffness. "Took a bullet that shattered the bone. Healed up mostly, but it aches when the weather changes. My youngest brother, Hugh, died of cholera 2 years after the war ended." "I'm so sorry," Josephine said softly. "Life's hard," Harrison said. "We lost our father when I was 12, Hugh was 8, and Henry was 10. Ma raised us alone, worked herself nearly to death doing it. She passed 5 years ago, just wore out from a hard life. That's when I decided to head out here, find some peace." "And have you found peace?" Harrison looked at her across the table, firelight dancing in his blue eyes. "I had," he said. "Until I saw you sitting on that bench in town looking lost and defeated, and I realized peace isn't worth much if you're not willing to disturb it to help someone in need." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Josephine wasn't quite ready to examine. She focused on her plate, her heart beating faster than it should. After supper, Harrison insisted on cleaning up while Josephine sat in the armchair by the fire. She watched him move around the cabin, this big, powerful man performing domestic tasks with calm efficiency. Everything about him contradicted what she'd been taught about rough mountain men. He was gentle in his movements, thoughtful in his words, respectful in his treatment of her. "I have some books if you like to read," Harrison said, gesturing to the shelves. "Not much variety, but there's a few novels, some poetry, history." Josephine stood and examined the collection. Shakespeare, Whitman, Dickens, several dime novels, and a well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. "You're a reader. Ma taught us, said a man without books is a man without windows on the world." Harrison smiled at the memory. I might live alone in the wilderness, but I like knowing there's more to life than what I can see from my front door. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, Harrison agreed. He finished putting away the last of the dishes and turned to face her. Josephine, I want to say something, and I hope you'll hear it the way I mean it. She turned from the bookshelf, suddenly nervous. You're welcome here as long as you want to stay, Harrison said. Not just tonight. Days, weeks, months, I don't care. You're safe here, and I won't let anyone make you feel unwelcome or unworthy. That's a promise. Tears stung Josephine's eyes. You don't even know me. I know enough, Harrison said firmly. I know you've been treated poorly by people who should have known better. I know you're brave enough to come west alone looking for a fresh start. I know you've got more strength than you probably realize. And I know that every person in Tascosa who turned you away today is a damn fool. A tear slipped down Josephine's cheek before she could stop it. Harrison crossed the room in 2 long strides and caught it gently with his thumb, his touch feather light on her face. Don't cry, he said softly. You're worth so much more than the way they've treated you. How can you know that? Josephine whispered. Because I see you, Harrison said simply. Really see you. Not the rumors, not the scandal, not what other people say, just you. And what I see is a woman who deserves respect and kindness, and every good thing this world has to offer. Josephine couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her with such genuine conviction. Thomas had claimed to love her once, but his love had been conditional, dependent on her fitting his image of the perfect wife. Her father had cared for her, but in a distant, distracted way that never made her feel truly valued. Her mother had been gone too long. But this stranger, this mountain man who'd known her for mere hours, was looking at her like she was something precious. Thank you, she managed to say. Harrison stepped back, giving her space. You should get some rest. It's been a long day. Josephine nodded and retreated to the bedroom, bolting the door more out of habit than any real fear. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, expecting to lie awake for hours in this strange place. Instead, lulled by the sound of the creek outside and the profound quiet of the wilderness, she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, Josephine couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back: the disaster in Tascosa, Harrison's unexpected kindness, the cabin in the canyon breaks. She dressed quickly and emerged from the bedroom to find Harrison already up, breakfast cooking on the hearth. He looked like he'd been awake for hours, his hair still damp from washing. Morning, he said with a smile. Hope I didn't wake you. Not at all. What time is it? About 7. I'm usually up before dawn, old habits from the war. Harrison poured her a cup of coffee. How did you sleep? Better than I have in weeks, Josephine admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. I didn't realize how exhausted I was. They ate breakfast together, falling into the same easy conversation as the night before. Harrison told her about his plans for the day, checking on the cattle, mending a fence that had been damaged by coyotes, possibly doing some fishing in the creek. What would you like to do? He asked. You're welcome to come with me, or you can stay here and rest, read, whatever you prefer. Josephine considered. Part of her wanted to curl up with one of his books and hide from the world for a while. But a larger part wanted to understand this place, this life he'd built out here. I'd like to come with you, she said, if I won't be in the way. Harrison's smile was bright enough to rival the Texas sun. You won't be in the way at all. I'd enjoy the company. After breakfast, Harrison saddled 2 horses, a sturdy bay for himself and a gentle mare named Daisy for Josephine. She hadn't ridden in years, but Harrison was patient, helping her mount and adjusting the stirrups to the right length. Daisy's as calm as they come, he assured her. She'll take care of you." They rode out into the morning, following a trail that wound through the canyon breaks. Harrison pointed out landmarks, showed her where the cattle liked to graze, explained the geography of his land. He owned 600 acres, bought cheap from the government after the war, and knew every inch of it. The landscape was breathtaking in the clear morning light. Red rock walls rose on either side of the canyon, layered like pages in a book of geological history. Hawks circled overhead, and Josephine spotted a roadrunner darting between mesquite bushes. "It's so different from Denver," she said. "There, everything felt cramped and closed in, even though it's a city. Here, with all this open space, I feel like I can breathe." "That's exactly how I felt when I first came out here," Harrison said. "Like the land was big enough to hold all the parts of me that didn't fit anywhere else." They found the damaged fence around mid-morning, and Harrison swung down from his horse with practiced ease. Josephine dismounted more carefully, holding Daisy's reins while Harrison examined the broken posts. "Coyotes dug under here trying to get at a calf," he explained. "Need to reinforce it and dig the posts deeper." "Can I help?" Harrison looked at her thoughtfully. "You really want to?" "I told you, I don't want to be useless." He handed her a hammer and some nails. "Then you can help me hammer these support boards while I reset the posts." They worked together under the climbing sun, and Josephine found a strange satisfaction in the physical labor. Her hands weren't accustomed to this kind of work, and she knew she'd have blisters by evening, but there was something honest about it. Harrison was patient when she struggled, encouraging when she succeeded, and treated her like a capable partner rather than a delicate ornament. By the time they finished, Josephine's dress was dusty and her face was flushed with heat and effort. Harrison looked her over and smiled. "You've got some grit in you, Josephine Harper." "Is that a compliment in Texas?" "The highest compliment," Harrison assured her. They rode back to the cabin for lunch, and Josephine helped prepare a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. The afternoon stretched out lazy and warm, and Harrison suggested she rest while he went to check his traps along the creek. "Or you could come with me if you want," he added. Fair warning, though, checking traps isn't the most pleasant work. Josephine opted to stay at the cabin, and Harrison rode off with a promise to return before supper. Alone for the first time since arriving, she took the opportunity to explore more thoroughly. The cabin was solidly built, chinked tight against winter winds. Harrison's possessions were few but well maintained, his rifle cleaned and oiled, his clothes mended, his books carefully preserved. She found herself thinking about the man who'd built this life for himself out here in the wilderness. Harrison Dalton was unlike any man she'd ever known. He had the strength and survival skills to thrive in this harsh landscape, yet he read poetry and treated her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. He could have taken advantage of her desperate situation, but instead he'd offered help with no strings attached. That evening, Harrison returned with 3 rabbits already cleaned and ready for cooking. Josephine helped him prepare a stew, and they ate as the sun set, painting the canyon walls in brilliant shades of orange and crimson. "I was thinking," Harrison said as they cleaned up after supper, "if you want to stay on for a while, I could use some help around here." "I'm not suggesting charity. This would be a fair arrangement. You could help with cooking, mending, maybe keeping track of supplies and such. In exchange, you'd have room and board and a place to figure out what you want to do next." Josephine's hands stilled in the dishwater. "You're offering me a job, a partnership, more like. I live simple out here, but I could use another set of hands, and you need a safe place to stay while you decide your future. Seems like it could work for both of us." It was tempting, dangerously so. But Josephine worried about propriety. about what it would mean for her already damaged reputation if word got out she was living alone with a man in the wilderness. "What about your reputation?" she asked. "And mine. If people in Tascosa find out, let them talk," Harrison said firmly. "I don't give a damn about Tascosa's opinion, and you shouldn't either. They already judged you without knowing you. Their respect isn't worth having." He paused. "But if it bothers you, we could go into town and have the circuit preacher marry us next time he comes through." Josephine's head snapped up. "What?" Harrison looked suddenly uncertain, a flush creeping up his neck. "I'm saying this all wrong. Look, Josephine, I know we just met, but I also know that you're the first person I've wanted to talk to in 3 years. You're smart and strong, and you don't back down from hard work. You make this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. And I think you deserve better than a world that treats you like you're worthless." Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "You're talking about marriage, eventually maybe, if you wanted." Harrison ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated with his own inability to articulate what he felt. "I'm not asking you to marry me right this second. I'm just saying that if you stayed, and if over time you came to feel like this could be a real home, like I could be someone you'd want to build a life with, I'd be honored to make it official." Josephine stared at him, this mountain man who treated her like royalty from the moment they met, who saw value in her when no one else did. The logical part of her brain screamed that this was crazy, that she couldn't possibly make such a decision based on 2 days' acquaintance. But her heart, her battered and bruised heart that had stopped believing anyone would ever truly want her, was singing a different tune entirely. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll stay," Harrison said softly, "at least for a while. Give yourself time to heal, time to figure out what you want, and give me time to show you that you're worth everything good in this world." Tears were streaming down Josephine's face now, but they weren't tears of sadness. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay." Harrison's face lit up with joy so pure, it took her breath away. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, and Josephine let herself be held by this strong, gentle man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't known how to pray. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Josephine woke each morning to find Harrison already up, starting breakfast and doing the early chores. They'd eat together, discussing plans for the day, then work side by side on the endless tasks that came with frontier living. Harrison taught her to ride properly, to shoot his rifle, to recognize animal tracks and read the weather in the clouds. Josephine brought organization to the cabin, inventoried supplies, mended his clothes, and transformed his simple meals into more elaborate fare with the spices and dried herbs she found in his stores. But more than the work, they talked. They shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Harrison told her about the war, about nightmares that still sometimes woke him in the darkness. Josephine confessed her terror that she'd never be enough for anyone, that the shame of her broken engagement would follow her forever. "You're more than enough," Harrison told her one evening as they sat by the creek watching the stars emerge. "Anyone who can't see that is blind." 3 weeks into her stay, Harrison needed to go into Tascosa for supplies. Josephine's stomach tightened with anxiety at the thought of returning to that town, facing those people again. "You don't have to come," Harrison said gently. "I can go alone." But Josephine squared her shoulders. "No. I won't hide forever. I'll go with you." They rode into town on a bright July morning, Josephine sitting beside Harrison on the wagon seat. She felt the stares as soon as they arrived, heard the whispers starting up like a swarm of locusts. Harrison seemed completely unbothered, helping her down from the wagon with courteous care and keeping a protective hand at the small of her back as they walked toward the general store. The proprietor's eyes widened when he saw them together. "Dalton, Miss Harper." "Morning," Harrison said pleasantly. "I've got a list of supplies I need." While Harrison conducted business, Josephine wandered the store, examining fabric and notions. She was looking at a bolt of blue calico when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, well. The charity case is still around." Josephine turned to find the blonde woman from her first day in town, flanked by her two companions. Their eyes gleamed with malicious curiosity. "I heard you'd taken up with the mountain man," the woman continued, "living in sin-up in his cabin. Is that really the best you could do?" Before Josephine could respond, Harrison appeared at her side. His presence was like a wall of solid muscle and quiet menace. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze whiskey, "I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." The woman, Mrs. Crawford, apparently looked momentarily uncertain, but her spite won out. "I'm just stating facts, Mr. Dalton. Everyone knows she's living with you up in the breaks without benefit of marriage." "That makes her the woman I'm courting," Harrison interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. "The woman I intend to marry if she'll have me. The woman who's worth 100 of the small-minded gossips in this town." He took a step forward, and Mrs. Crawford actually retreated. "And if I hear one more word against her character, from you or anyone else, you'll answer to me. Are we clear?" Mrs. Crawford's face had gone pale. She nodded mutely and scurried out of the store, her friends trailing behind like confused ducklings. Harrison turned to Josephine, his expression softening immediately. "You all right?" Josephine realized she was trembling, but not from fear. From something else entirely, a fierce rush of emotion she couldn't quite name. "You said you're courting me." "I am," Harrison said simply. "If that's all right with you. You said you intend to marry me." "I do." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I know it's fast, and I know we haven't followed any of the proper rules, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Josephine. I want you to be my wife. Not because of propriety or reputation, but because you've become essential to me. These past 3 weeks with you have been the best of my life." Josephine's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Harrison, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know you need time to be sure. I just want you to know where I stand." But Josephine realized she didn't need more time. She'd spent 3 weeks watching this man, learning him, seeing the truth of his character in 1,000 small actions. He was kind without being weak, strong without being cruel, intelligent without being condescending. He made her feel safe and valued and seen in a way she'd never experienced before. "I don't need time," she said softly. "Yes, Harrison, I'll marry you." For a moment, Harrison just stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. Then a smile spread across his face, brilliant and joyful, and he swept her up in his arms right there in the general store, lifting her feet clean off the ground. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sure," Josephine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you, Harrison Dalton." "I love you too," Harrison said, setting her down gently. "God, Josephine, I love you so much." The proprietor cleared his throat awkwardly. "I hate to interrupt, but folks are staring." Harrison looked around and noticed that half the people in the store were watching them with expressions ranging from shock to scandalized disapproval. He grinned and called out, "Everyone hear that? Josephine Harper just agreed to be my wife. So you can all stop your gossiping and start preparing to be civil at our wedding." The announcement spread through Tascosa like wildfire. By the time Harrison and Josephine left the general store, it seemed like the entire town knew. Some people looked scandalized, others approving, but Harrison didn't care about any of it. He kept Josephine close to his side, radiating protective pride. They stopped at the land office to arrange for the circuit preacher to perform the ceremony on his next visit, which would be in 2 weeks. Then Harrison took Josephine to the dress shop. "Pick out fabric for a wedding dress," he said. "Whatever you want, don't worry about the cost." "Harrison, I don't need anything fancy. I know you don't need it," Harrison interrupted gently. "But you deserve it. You deserve to feel beautiful on your wedding day." The shop owner, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, had heard about the engagement. Her attitude toward Josephine had undergone a complete transformation from 2 weeks ago. "Congratulations, dear," she said warmly. "Harrison Dalton is a good man. You're very lucky." "I know," Josephine said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Mrs. Patterson helped her select a beautiful cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim. "I can have it made up in time for the wedding," she promised. "I'll do my very best work." They returned to the cabin that evening laden with supplies and bubbling with plans for the future. Harrison was more talkative than Josephine had ever seen him, sharing ideas about expanding the cabin, maybe adding another room or 2 for the children they might have someday. "If you want children," he added quickly, "we should probably talk about that." Josephine smiled. "I do want children, someday. Not right away, but someday." "Good." Harrison's relief was palpable. "Because I'd like to have a family with you. A real family, the kind I had before the war took everything." That night, they sat together on the bench Harrison had built outside the cabin, watching the stars emerge in the endless Texas sky. Harrison's arm was around Josephine's shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked softly. "Happier than I've ever been," Josephine answered honestly. "A month ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never find a place where I belonged, never find someone who could see past the rumors and shame. And then you appeared." "I'm the lucky one," Harrison said. "I was just existing out here, not really living. You've brought color and light and purpose back into my world." The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Harrison worked from dawn to dusk improving the cabin, determined to make it perfect for his bride. He built new shelves, repaired the roof, even constructed a small porch where they could sit in the evenings. Josephine sewed curtains for the windows, organized every corner of the cabin, and practiced cooking over the hearth until she could produce meals that would have impressed her mother. But mostly, she spent time with Harrison, learning the rhythms of his life and fitting herself into them. They rode out together each day, checking the cattle and tending to the land. Harrison taught her about survival in the wilderness, how to find water, how to navigate by the stars, which plants were edible and which were poison. Josephine absorbed it all eagerly, determined to be a true partner in this life they were building. The physical attraction between them grew stronger each day, crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Harrison was always respectful, never pushing beyond the boundaries of propriety, but Josephine could see the desire in his eyes when he looked at her. And she felt it too, a longing that went beyond anything she'd experienced with Thomas. Thomas had kissed her a few chaste times during their engagement, but there had been no real passion in it. With Harrison, even the brush of his hand against hers sent fire through her veins. She found herself watching the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he worked, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his touch. 3 days before the wedding, they rode into Tascosa to finalize arrangements with the preacher, who had arrived early for a series of services. Reverend Matthews was a kind-faced man in his 50s who listened to their story with interest. "I'm happy to perform the ceremony," he said. "Though I must ask, are you both certain this is what you want? You've known each other less than a month." "I've never been more certain of anything," Harrison said firmly. "Nor I," Josephine added. The Reverend smiled. Then I'll be honored to unite you in marriage. Will you be having the ceremony in town or at your cabin? The cabin, Harrison said immediately. That's our home. That's where we want to start our married life. They arranged for the Reverend to ride out to the cabin on Saturday morning. Harrison invited the Miller family, his nearest neighbors, and Josephine suggested they also invite Mrs. Patterson from the dress shop, who had been so kind during the preparations. The night before the wedding, Josephine lay in bed staring at the ceiling, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would marry Harrison Dalton, this mountain man who had seen her worth when no one else did. Tomorrow she would become his wife, his partner, his family. A soft knock on her bedroom door startled her. "Josephine, you awake?" She rose and opened the door to find Harrison standing there in the firelight, looking uncertain. "Can't sleep either?" she asked with a smile. "Too much running through my head." Harrison ran a hand through his hair. "I wanted to say something before tomorrow, before everything becomes official." "What is it?" Harrison took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. "I want you to know that I see you, Josephine. I see your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. I see how hard you've worked to build a new life here. I see your courage in agreeing to marry a rough mountain man instead of holding out for someone more refined." "You're not rough," Josephine protested. "You're the most gentle man I've ever known. I'm going to spend every day of our marriage making sure you know how valued you are," Harrison continued. "You're not unworthy of respect. You deserve to be treated like royalty, and that's exactly how I intend to treat you." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "I love you so much. I love you too." Harrison kissed her forehead tenderly. "Now try to get some sleep. We've got a big day tomorrow." Josephine somehow managed to doze off in the early hours of the morning and woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through her window. Her wedding day had arrived. Mrs. Patterson and her daughter arrived first, bringing the finished wedding dress and offering to help Josephine prepare. The dress was even more beautiful than Josephine had imagined, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs and tiny pearl buttons down the back. "You look absolutely lovely," Mrs. Patterson said as she arranged Josephine's hair, pinning it up with small white flowers Harrison had picked that morning. The Miller family arrived next. John and Sarah Miller with their 3 children, bringing fresh bread and a berry pie as wedding gifts. They greeted Harrison warmly and welcomed Josephine into their frontier community with genuine kindness. Reverend Matthews was the last to arrive, his black coat dusted with trail dirt but his smile warm and welcoming. He sat up on the porch Harrison had built, using the canyon wall as a spectacular backdrop for the ceremony. When Josephine stepped out of the cabin in her wedding dress, Harrison's expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. His eyes went wide, and he actually seemed to forget how to breathe for a moment. "You're stunning," he managed to say. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood facing each other on the porch, the small gathering of guests arrayed before them, the vast Texas landscape spreading out in all directions. Reverend Matthews spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about partnership and commitment and love. When it came time for the vows, Harrison's hands were steady as he held Josephine's. His voice was clear and strong. "I, Harrison Dalton, take you, Josephine Harper, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you for all the days of my life. I promise to see you, truly see you, every single day. I promise to build a home with you, a family with you, a life worth living." Josephine's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I, Josephine Harper, take you, Harrison Dalton, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to love you with everything I have, to trust in the strength of what we've built together. I promise to make this wilderness our home." Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and Harrison kissed Josephine with a tenderness that made her heart soar. The small gathering applauded, and just like that, Josephine Harper became Josephine Dalton. The celebration that followed was joyful despite its simplicity. Sarah Miller had brought her fiddle, and she played lively tunes while the children danced. They shared food and stories, and for the first time since leaving Denver, Josephine felt truly welcomed into a community. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, leaving Harrison and Josephine alone as husband and wife for the first time. Harrison built up the fire while Josephine changed out of her wedding dress into a simple cotton nightgown Mrs. Patterson had sewn as a wedding gift. When she emerged from the bedroom, Harrison was waiting by the fire. He changed into clean clothes and looked nervous in a way she'd never seen before. "Come here," he said softly, extending his hand. Josephine crossed to him, and Harrison pulled her into his arms, just holding her close for a long moment. "I was terrified you'd change your mind," he admitted. "Right up until the Reverend pronounced us married, I was afraid you'd realize you could do better." Josephine pulled back to look at him. "There is no better, Harrison. There's only you." What followed was tender and sweet, Harrison taking his time to show Josephine how much he loved her. He was gentle with her inexperience, patient and caring, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. By the time they finally lay together in the bed that would now be theirs to share, Josephine understood what it meant to be truly loved. "Are you happy?" Harrison whispered into the darkness, his arm secure around her waist. "So happy I can barely believe this is real," Josephine answered. "A month ago I thought my life was over. Now I feel like it's just beginning." "Our life," Harrison corrected. "It's our life now. Everything I have, everything I am, is yours." The months that followed were the happiest of Josephine's life. She and Harrison fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease, working together during the day and talking late into the night by the fire. Harrison taught her everything about frontier survival, and Josephine shared her knowledge of books and learning, reading aloud to him in the evenings. As summer turned to fall, they worked together to prepare for winter. Harrison hunted deer and elk, smoking the meat for preservation. Josephine learned to preserve vegetables and fruits, filling the shelves with jars of beans, tomatoes, and wild plum preserves. They cut firewood until they had enough to last through the coldest months. The Millers became regular visitors, and Josephine developed a genuine friendship with Sarah Miller. The two women would sit together during visits, sewing and talking while Harrison and John discussed cattle and weather and the best hunting spots. In October, Harrison took Josephine on a trip into the deeper wilderness, a week-long journey to show her the high country where he'd done most of his trapping. They camped under the stars, and Harrison taught her to fish, to track game, to read the land like a book. "You've become quite the frontier woman," Harrison said one evening as they sat by their campfire. "When I first saw you in Tascosa, I never imagined you'd take to this life so naturally." "That's because you saw me for who I really was, not who society tried to make me be," Josephine said. "In Denver, I was supposed to be delicate and refined and helpless. Here, I can be strong, I can be capable, I can be myself." "And yourself is extraordinary," Harrison said, pulling her close. Winter came hard and fast to the Texas Panhandle that year. The first snow fell in late November, coating the canyon breaks in white and transforming the landscape into something magical. Harrison and Josephine spent the long winter evenings reading together, playing cards and making plans for spring. It was during one of those long winter nights that Josephine realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't been certain until the morning sickness became undeniable. She waited until dinner to tell Harrison, nervous about how he'd react. "I have something to tell you," she said as they finished their meal. Harrison looked up, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby. In early summer, I think." For a moment, Harrison just stared at her. Then his face split into the widest smile Josephine had ever seen. He was out of his chair in an instant, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby." "You're happy?" Josephine asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Harrison set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "You've given me everything, Josephine. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I love you so much." The pregnancy transformed Harrison from protective to almost comically overprotective. He insisted Josephine rest more, refused to let her help with the heavier chores, and fussed over her constantly. Josephine found it equal parts endearing and exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from carrying water from the creek. "I know, but I can't help it," Harrison said sheepishly. "You're carrying our child. I want to make sure you're both safe." Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and new life. Josephine's belly grew round with their baby, and Harrison would spend hours with his hand pressed against her stomach, feeling the kicks and movements of their child. "He's going to be strong," Harrison said one evening. "She," Josephine corrected with a smile. "She's going to be strong." They didn't know, of course, but they enjoyed debating it. Harrison wanted to name a son after his late brother Henry. Josephine liked the name Rose if they had a daughter. As June approached and Josephine's time drew near, Sarah Miller came to stay at the cabin to help with the birth. She was an experienced midwife who delivered all 3 of her own children and helped with several others in the area. On a warm evening in early June, Josephine's labor began. Harrison was beside himself with worry, pacing the main room while Sarah and Josephine worked in the bedroom. Every cry of pain from Josephine made him wince like he'd been struck. "She's doing fine," Sarah told him during one of her trips out to get more water. "This is normal. She's strong." After hours that felt like years to Harrison, he heard a new sound, the lusty cry of a newborn baby. A moment later, Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Josephine did wonderfully." Harrison was in the bedroom before Sarah finished speaking. Josephine lay in the bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. Harrison approached carefully, as though afraid he might break something. "Meet your son," Josephine said softly, turning the bundle so Harrison could see the tiny, red face of his child. Harrison looked down at the baby and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his son. His and Josephine's. A perfect combination of them both, the beginning of the family they'd dreamed of building. "He's beautiful," Harrison whispered, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. "You're beautiful. You're both perfect." "You want to hold him?" Josephine asked. Harrison nodded, and Josephine carefully transferred the baby into his large, capable hands. The infant looked impossibly small against Harrison's broad chest, but he held the baby with such gentle reverence that Josephine's heart melted all over again. "Hello, Henry," Harrison said softly. "I'm your papa, and I promise you, I'm going to love you and protect you and make sure you always know how wanted you are." Little Henry yawned and settled against his father's chest, and Harrison looked at Josephine with such love and gratitude that she started crying too. The weeks after Henry's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Harrison was a devoted father, getting up with the baby in the night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching his son sleep. Josephine had never seen him so content. "I keep thinking about how different my life would be if I hadn't seen you sitting on that bench in Tascosa," Harrison said one evening as they sat together, Henry sleeping between them. "If I'd just ridden past or decided not to get involved." "I think about that too," Josephine admitted. "I'd probably still be in that town, desperate and alone, maybe having to accept work I didn't want or marry someone who didn't really value me. Instead, you're here with me, and we have this beautiful boy." Harrison reached over to take her hand. "Best decision I ever made, talking to you that day." As Henry grew from infant to baby, the Dalton family settled into their life in the canyon breaks. Harrison expanded his cattle operation, and Josephine helped keep the accounts, her head for numbers proving invaluable. They saved money carefully, planning for the future. When Henry was 2 years old, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise but no less joyful. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in the spring of 1882, completing their family. Harrison was just as devoted to Rose as he was to Henry. This strong mountain man reduced to putty by his daughter's smile. Josephine would often find him sitting on the porch with Rose in his arms, pointing out birds and clouds and teaching her to love the wilderness that surrounded them. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Henry grew into a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick mind. Rose was adventurous and fearless, keeping both parents on their toes. Harrison taught them both to ride, to track, to understand and respect the land. Josephine taught them to read, to think, to question and learn. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Josephine by taking her back to Tascosa. She hadn't been to town in months, preferring their quiet life in the canyon. But Harrison had a purpose. He led her to a new building on the edge of town, a small but solid structure with a sign that read Dalton General Store. "What's this?" Josephine asked, confused. "It's ours," Harrison said. "I've been working on it for months." "I know you loved working in your father's store back in Denver, and I thought maybe you'd like to run one here. We could stock it with supplies for the ranchers and trappers in the area. Sarah Miller has already agreed to help mind it when you can't be here." Josephine stared at the building, then at her husband. "You built me a store." "I wanted you to have something that was yours," Harrison said. "You've given up so much to be with me, to live this isolated life. I wanted to give you something back, something that would challenge you and let you use all those skills with numbers and people." Tears streamed down Josephine's face as she threw her arms around Harrison's neck. "I love you so much. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." The store became a success, providing a good supplemental income and giving Josephine a chance to interact with the growing community around Tascosa. But more importantly, it was a symbol of Harrison's deep respect for her. His understanding that she was more than just a wife and mother, she was a capable businesswoman with her own talents and dreams. 10 years after that fateful day when Josephine arrived in Tascosa, she stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Harrison teach Henry and Rose how to properly saddle a horse. The cabin had grown over the years, with additional rooms and a larger porch where they spent summer evenings as a family. Sarah Miller rode up the trail, waving cheerfully. She and Josephine had become close friends, and Sarah often came to visit while John and Harrison discussed ranching matters. "Your family is looking well," Sarah said as she dismounted. "Henry's getting tall." "He'll be as big as his father soon," Josephine agreed, "and just as stubborn." They laughed together, comfortable in the way of old friends. As they settled on the porch with coffee, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 10 years ago, she'd been a woman the world had deemed unworthy of respect, broken by scandal and rejection. Now she was a successful businesswoman, a beloved wife, a devoted mother, and a valued member of her community, all because one mountain man had looked past the surface and seen her true worth. That evening, after the children were in bed, Josephine and Harrison sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge over the canyon breaks. Harrison's arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned into his solid warmth the way she had 1,000 times before. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked softly. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to someone everyone else had written off." Harrison pulled her closer. "Never. Not for one single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine. You turned this cabin into a home, this land into a legacy for our children. You made me believe in family again in the future. How could I ever regret that?" "They told me I was unworthy of respect," Josephine said, voicing something she rarely spoke of anymore. "Back in Denver, in Tascosa, those first few days, they made me believe I was damaged, that I'd never be enough for anyone. And I treated you like royalty from the very first day," Harrison finished, "because that's what you deserved. That's what you still deserve. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you chose me, that you saw something in a rough mountain man worth building a life with." "You were never rough," Josephine said. "You were gentle and kind, and you saw me when no one else did. You saved me, Harrison." "No," Harrison corrected softly. "We saved each other. I was just existing before you came along, not really living. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day. We saved each other." Josephine turned in his arms to kiss him, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, both were smiling. "I love our life," Josephine said. "I love this wild, beautiful, hard life we've built together. I wouldn't change a single thing." "Neither would I," Harrison agreed. "Well, maybe one thing: I wish I'd had the courage to propose to you that very first night instead of waiting 3 weeks. Josephine laughed. "If you'd proposed that first night, I probably would have thought you were insane." "Fair point." Harrison grinned. "But I knew even then. I looked at you sitting on that bench, looking lost and brave at the same time, and something in me recognized something in you, like we were meant to find each other." "Fate," Josephine said. "Or just dumb luck," Harrison countered. "Either way, I'm grateful for it every day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the canyon, the creek burbling over stones, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft rustle of wind through the juniper trees. "Papa," a small voice came from the doorway. Rose stood there in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. "I had a bad dream." Harrison was up immediately, scooping his daughter into his arms. "Come here, little one. You're safe. Papa's got you." Josephine watched as Harrison carried Rose to the bench, settling her between them. Rose snuggled against her father's chest, already falling back to sleep in the security of his embrace. "She's got you wrapped around her little finger," Josephine observed with amusement. "Completely," Harrison admitted without shame. "Just like her mother." They sat together as a family, Rose dozing between them until Harrison carefully carried her back to bed. When he returned, Josephine was standing at the porch rail, looking out over the darkened landscape. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Josephine said. "How much we've built together. And I'm thinking about the future, about watching Henry and Rose grow up in this beautiful place, about growing old with you right here." "Sounds perfect to me," Harrison said, resting his chin on top of her head. "Though I should warn you, I plan to be one of those annoying old men who tells the same stories over and over. And I'll be one of those annoying old women who corrects all the details you get wrong," Josephine countered. They laughed together, the sound carrying out over the canyon. This was their life, full of love and laughter, hard work and simple pleasures, challenges overcome and dreams realized. It wasn't the life Josephine had imagined for herself back in Denver, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the foundation they'd built. Henry grew into a young man who combined his father's strength with his mother's intelligence, taking over more and more of the ranch work. Rose became a skilled rider and crack shot, refusing to be limited by anyone's expectations of what a girl could or couldn't do. The Dalton store in Tascosa prospered, becoming a central gathering place for the ranching community. Josephine's reputation as a fair dealer and sharp businesswoman spread, and people came from miles around to trade at her establishment. She hired several local women to help run the store, giving them opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. Harrison's cattle operation expanded until he was running several hundred head. He hired a few ranch hands to help with the work, and the Dalton Ranch became known throughout the Panhandle as a well-run operation that treated its workers fairly. But despite all their success and prosperity, Harrison and Josephine never forgot where they'd started. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, they would ride into Tascosa and sit for a moment on the bench outside the land office where Josephine had been waiting when Harrison first saw her. "Hard to believe it's been 15 years, Harrison said on one such anniversary, his hair now showing threads of silver at the temples. 15 years since you rescued me," Josephine agreed. 15 years since you let me, Harrison corrected. "You could have said no when I offered to help. You could have refused to come to the cabin. You could have left at any point. But you stayed, and you built this life with me. That took courage." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the town that had once rejected Josephine go about its business. Tascosa had grown considerably over the years, and so had people's attitudes. These days, Josephine was one of the most respected members of the community, known for her business acumen and her charitable work. Mrs. Dalton, a young woman, approached, carrying a baby. It took Josephine a moment to recognize her, one of the women who'd mocked her that first day in town. "I wanted to thank you again for giving me work at the store. It's made such a difference for my family." "You're very welcome, Charlotte," Josephine said warmly. "You're a good worker." "I'm glad to have you." After the woman left, Harrison squeezed Josephine's hand. "You're a better person than I am. If someone had treated me the way she treated you, I don't know if I could be so gracious." "Holding grudges takes too much energy," Josephine said. "And besides, she was young and foolish. People can change." "Like you changed me," Harrison said. "You didn't need changing. You just needed someone to build a life with." They rode back to the cabin as the sun set, painting the canyon walls in shades of fire and gold. When they arrived, they found Henry and Rose had prepared a special anniversary dinner, complete with Rose's attempt at a cake that was lopsided but made with love. "To Mama and Papa," Henry said, raising his glass. "The best parents anyone could ask for." "To family," Rose added. "To love," Harrison said, his eyes on Josephine. "To second chances," Josephine finished. "And to mountain men who see worth where others see none." That night, lying in bed with Harrison's arms around her, Josephine reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. She thought about the scared, rejected woman who'd arrived in Tascosa all those years ago, and the confident, successful woman she'd become. She thought about the mountain man who'd treated her like royalty when the world told her she was worthless, and how that simple act of respect had transformed both their lives. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Harrison murmured back, half asleep. "Always have, always will. As Josephine drifted off to sleep, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought her to Texas, to Tascosa, to that bench where a mountain man with kind eyes had asked if she was lost. She'd been lost then, in every way that mattered. But Harrison had found her, had seen her, had valued her. And together, they'd built something beautiful in the wild Texas canyon breaks, a home, a family, a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The story of Harrison and Josephine Dalton became something of a legend in the Texas Panhandle, passed down through the years as an example of how true love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Their children grew up hearing the tale of how their mother arrived in Tascosa with nothing and no one, and how their father had offered help when everyone else turned away. Henry eventually took over the ranch entirely, marrying a schoolteacher from Amarillo and raising his own family in the canyon breaks his parents had tamed. Rose, true to her independent nature, became one of the first female cattle buyers in Texas, earning respect through her keen eye for livestock and her absolute integrity in business dealings. But that all came later. For now, in this moment, Harrison and Josephine were simply two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen to build a life together based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and deep, abiding love. They were proof that sometimes the world's judgment means nothing compared to the truth two people can see in each other's hearts. And every night for the rest of their long lives together, Harrison made sure Josephine knew she was valued, respected, and loved beyond measure. Because that's what she deserved, not despite the world's rejection, but simply because of who she was. A remarkable woman who'd been told she was unworthy, but who'd found a mountain man wise enough to see past the lies to the truth underneath. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the scandal in Denver, not the rejection in Tascosa, not the whispers and judgment of small-minded people. What mattered was the life they built together, the family they raised, the love they shared, and the home they created in the wild, beautiful Texas frontier where they'd first found each other. Harrison and Josephine Dalton lived to see their golden wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and a community that had come to understand what Harrison had known from the very first day, that Josephine was a woman of rare strength, intelligence, and character, deserving of respect and so much more. And until the very end, Harrison treated her like the royalty she'd always been, even when the world was too blind to see it. Their love story became the foundation for generations of Daltons who called the Texas Panhandle home, each one carrying forward the legacy of respect, partnership, and unwavering devotion that Harrison and Josephine had established in those early days, when a mountain man and a rejected woman found exactly what they needed in each other.